Welcome back to Inquiring Minds. My name is Doug, and thanks for joining me for another Pen Resurrection Sunday. This is a circa 1940s Moore 94A lever filler fountain pen in a lovely vertical stack celluloid that was sent to me by John Summers. I discovered the issue with this pen was that the lever bar had broken off, so it no longer presses against the pressure bar inside the pen to squeeze that latex sac to fill the pen. I looked into replacement levers, but nothing was available that would fit this pen. So I talked to John about it, and he mentioned he had another Moore of the same model, but not quite as nice celluloid. He offered to send that pen to me to see if we could make one living pen out of two dead ones. While he's sending me that pen, I thought I'd work on this pen to clean up the nib and see how it writes in advance. Then an idea struck me on how to make this pen function without the lever. The pressure bar inside is in good shape, so all we need is a way to press on that pressure bar to squeeze the sac, and I thought of a coin filler. Coin fillers were latex sac fountain pens from the 1910s and 1920s. They just cut a slot in the barrel to allow a small coin to be pressed into the sac to fill the pen. Waterman even made one that came with its own Waterman coin. So I'm going to give this a try. The pen came with a usable but rather stiff latex sac already attached to it. And I've had to remove some of the material off the section here because I think this section has been separated from this barrel for quite a long time because the celluloid has shrunk, not allowing the section to go back into the barrel. So I've sanded that down a bit, and I'm going to heat up the celluloid on the barrel a little bit to allow it to be a little bit flexible so I don't snap it or break it when I press the section into the barrel. Once I've done that, I'm going to use a dime, lift that lever, and press the dime into the sac to see how well it will fill with any ink at all. There, now I heated the barrel and slid that section back in. I've got a Canadian dime, which is worth about 5 cents American, but it's smaller than an American nickel. And we're going to put the section down into the ink. It's one nice thing about these Waterman ink bottles is they allow you to lay them on their sides like that with their diamond-shaped bodies. So I'm going to get it down into the ink as far as I can and press this coin into the barrel. See if I get any bubbles at all. I don't think I have enough ink. I might get a better bottle of Waterman's. There's a more full bottle of Waterman's Serenity Blue, and we'll try this again. Right down into the section and push several times. I've done no cleaning on this nib whatsoever on this section or feed, and this is a Moore 94A 1940s, and it has a number 5 size 14 karat gold. Interesting nib. I'd say it's a fine, and whatever ink it had in it before was a blue black, because that Waterman's, it might have been black because that Waterman's Serenity has turned black on me here. Let's see, yeah, a little bit of bounce. So that's a very pleasant nib. Well, it writes very, very nicely. Unfortunately, that coin filler method did not work on this very much. I don't think I got very much ink in that sac at all, but the sac was relatively stiff, and I'm going to replace it with a new one now that I know the pen writes. And I might change my coin a little bit to make it press further in. So that 10-cent coin, as I said, is only worth about 5 cents American. So I think it's worth cutting it a little bit to make a specialized coin to fit right down into that slot and push that lever all the way in. I'm going to take that section off again, take the old sac off. We're going to knock out that gold nib and feed and polish all that up. The nib is actually writing very, very nicely, so I'm not going to do much to that, but we'll polish the whole thing up, and then we'll put a new sac on it, and maybe I'll take my Dremel tool to my 10-cent piece and make it into a worthless piece. It won't be worth anything as a coin of the realm. It will certainly work to push that sac all the way down. Let's give that experiment a try. So I got the section out again. Let's cut this sac off. A little bit of ink in there, but not very much. and this sack was pretty stiff. There we go, out with the old, in with the new. I'm not going to put that sack on yet. I'm going to put this section in the ultrasonic bath of pen flush, which is 9 parts distilled water and 1 part ammonia, and let it sit for a few minutes, and then we'll go at knocking that feed out of there. Okay, fresh out of the bath, it actually cleaned up that gold a little bit. I rinsed out as much of the old ink as possible. Get out Bill's block, find the right slot for it, and the right knockout rod, and see if it comes out. Yeah, it's fairly tight. There we go. And the nib remains, and the feed drops out. And lots of black ink in there. So it wasn't blue black, it was black. Pull the nib all the way out. There we go. And there is the nib. We'll polish that up. I'll put it back in the ultrasonic bath again. There's the feed. And it goes back in the bath with the section. And then we'll come back and polish up that nib. Now I'll polish up that nib on my jeweler's polishing cloth. The beauty of gold, after 80 years, comes up brand new. Now I'm going to polish up the bottom of that feed. Typical feed from the 1940s, but that's all ebonite, black hard rubber. I'll polish that up with some polishing compound, get it nice and shiny. Now that's very hard to polish because it's like a chainsaw. It's ripping up everything I put at it. Do the best I can. Not too bad. I'll put it back in the ultrasonic. And I took the opportunity to polish up the section while I was there with the polishing compound. And the nib and the feed are both shiny and new. Let's line them up right like that. Get some gripper material here. Hold it down and get a grip on both sides and push it in. There we go. It's about where it was. That curve of the feed was just about at that lip. It's all nice and clean. Give it another rub to get my prints off it. And isn't that a lovely Art Deco style 1940s 14 karat gold nib. Let's see what it says on it. I'll have to get out my loop. I can't read the camera. And it has more life Maniflex, but the E is missing the bottom part of the E, so it says Maniflex 14 KT. Maybe you can read that. The E right there is missing the bottom part, so that's an F. FLFX, Maniflex. Maybe that is what it meant to be, but I think it's supposed to say Maniflex. Anyway, it wrote very, very nicely. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this size 17 sack and we're going to fit it on here and put it back in the barrel. And I'm not going to shellac anything down because once that other moor comes, we'll see whether we can transplant a good lever onto this barrel by removing this one and replacing it with the other one. I also have a pen friend who says her son can fix this lever if he has an original lever to go by, make a new one. So we'll see about that. But I'll be interested to see if I can use this as a coin filler to begin with. So we're going to replace the sack. We're not going to cement anything down so I can get the pen apart again. But the first thing we need to do is to trim this to size. So that section goes into there. So about where the threads are starting right there is where I need to trim this sack. So just about there. So I'm going to give that a try. To trim it right there like that. And we'll test fit it with our sack spreader. There we go. That should work out just perfectly. Yep, I have to heat that barrel again to allow that section to go in without splitting it. See whether I can show this without burning myself. Ow. So here I have my Inky Nib barrel heater that I got from Scott at the Inky Nib, and it's heating to 61 degrees Celsius right now, and I've got that barrel sitting in there, and I take it out every so often just to feel it's not getting too warm. I put 3D printed carbon fiber material in those holes to keep the pen from touching the metal, and that seems to work. But that's what I'm using to heat these barrels. There, and that fit back on just nicely. It just allows the celluloid to be a little bit pliable so it isn't brittle and split, because that's quite a tight fit right there. In fact, before I finish with this pen, I think I'm going to sand that section down a little bit more to make it fit inside this barrel a little bit better without all that pressure, and then we won't have the possibility of a split in the future, because that celluloid has shrunk quite substantially. But isn't it gorgeous? Look at that. Now I'll pull it back out again, and we'll do it for real this time. Get out the Inky Nib shellacker pen, piston filler, keep the barrel away from any shellac, and we're just going to dial up a little bit of shellac and paint just the nipple. There we go. Spread our sack for the second time and fit it underneath. Give it a slight twist, make sure it's straight, and then I'm going to paint a bead of shellac just around that seam. Again, I don't want to get any on this part here because I don't want it to be adhering to that barrel just yet until we have a good solution to filling this pen. So I'm going to let that dry overnight. I might add another coat on there just to make sure there's no leaks. As far as I know, I just invented a new fountain pen filling system. In the 1910s and 20s, pen companies considered using coins as fillers because they were convenient and everybody had coins in their pockets within easy reach. How simple to reach into your pocket and pull out a dime to fill your empty fountain pen. My mom used to say I should always have a dime in my pocket so I could make a phone call in an emergency. Those are the days. Well, now, instead of coins in our pockets, we have phones. And I might not have a coin in my pocket anymore, but as a guitarist, I always have a guitar pick. So instead of using the dime on this moor, I decided to try to use a guitar pick instead. Just lift the lever and push the guitar pick in. And it works. I filled the pen with 0.6 milliliters of ink, which is not bad at all. The point on this pick was a little too pointy and slippery, and instead of destroying my John Lennon The Beatles guitar pick, I took a really nice mother of toilet seat type pick and cut the end off it. Now it fits into that slot just perfectly, and I push down and I fill it. Actually, I might need some more ink because I've been writing with this pen. So let's do it again. Dip the nib into the ink up to the section and push on the guitar pick. And I get bubbles. Push several times for a full fill. Now let's get some paper and do another writing sample. This is a Moore 94-A. I'm going to call it a pick filler now. Registered trademark. And the nib is wonderful now. I made sure it was well aligned, and I polished it with some 8000 and then some 12,000 grit micro mesh. And it's smooth with a good amount of feedback. The good feedback, not the bad kind. And the ink, of course, you just saw was Waterman's Serenity Blue. And the nib has Maniflex written or stamped onto it. And I think what they meant was that it's fairly stiff. It has some bounce to it. So it is flexible, but it has some real stiffness to it as well. It's kind of the best of both worlds. If you write with it at quite an extreme angle because of the downturn on that nib, you can see it's curved down, you can write through a number of copies. So that's what they called manifold copies. So carbon copy is the way they copied things in the day. If you needed some copies of a page that you were writing, you'd lay carbon paper underneath it, and the carbon would be pressed through onto the page underneath. And so you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 copies, depending on how hard you pressed and how many layers of carbon paper you put under there. And for those of you that are too young to remember any of this, which is most of you at this point, that's where CC comes from. When you're on an email and you go CC, because you're making a copy to someone on your mailing list, that CC comes from carbon copies. Who knew? Well, I did.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
And this nib makes a nice fine line, which is around 0.4 millimeters in thickness, which is a Western fine. And with a little bit of pressure, you can get out to about 0.09 millimeters, which is a double broad. Again, it's not a flex nib, but you can get some line variation from it fairly easily. And this nib with varying amount of pressure gets you some really interesting looks with your lines. I'm really enjoying writing with this pen. And who knew that I'd have to reach back 30 years before this pen was made to get it to work 84 years later. Once I had the pen functioning, I set about polishing it up. I went at the celluloid cap and barrel with 400 grit flexible sandpaper and then went through all 9 levels of micromesh from 1500 to 12,000 and then finished up with Anderson Pen's microgloss polishing compound number 5 and microgloss polish number 1 to buff it to a really nice shine. And then I went at it with my jewelry cloth to get that gold shined up really nicely. I'm really pleased with that clip. It's a lovely Art Deco style clip. This pen is now perfect, except for the new, admittedly unusual filling system. Now I'll just wait for the arrival of John's other Moore 94A and see whether a new lever can be either swapped or created. Stay tuned, as I think we'll be seeing this pen again. And there you have it. Thanks go out to John for providing this pen for restoration. And as always, thank you for watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.